One of the most unusual things that happens on Chautauqua Lake is every once in a while one is fortunate enough to see and catch some of the biggest fish, freshwater fish of the North American continent, that being the muskellunge. Today we're going to talk about how I was taught to fish for muskellunge in Chautauqua Lake. Realize that most of my fishing was done in the northern half of the lake, and we'll look at the bottom of the lake as part of my assistance in this process a little later on in the tape. I thought at one time I was going to title this presentation, Fishing for Muskellunge as Taught to Me by Old Timers. And then when I began looking at the people that taught me how to fish, I found out that there were only two old timers. The rest of the people were contemporaries. The old timers were my father-in-law, Don Appleyard from Jamestown, who has had a family cottage up at just north of Woodland since the turn of the century, and a fellow by the name of Willis Rothra, an ice fisherman, a fisherman in general, a very kind and gentle soul. And the thing that I would like you to understand about fishing on Chautauqua Lake is that it's not just fishing for fish. And the best way to express that is a poem written by Willis a number of years ago.
My Friend the Lake by Willis H. Rothra. I sit in silent reverence as I gaze upon the lake and ask the Lord a few years' grace before my soul he takes. A scene of unmatched beauty as I view the rising sun and reminisce about the days when I was very young. With boyhood dreams I play again in the sand like yellow gold, with never once a single thought that someday I'd grow old. The lake has been my pulpit, where, without a spoken word, I give my thanks for many things to the one we call our Lord. When I'm in need of solace, that friend is always there. When pain or mental suffering seems more than I can bear, I ask that friend to comfort me and help me through the fight. A word comes back from somewhere that everything's all right. Preachers say that I'm all wrong, that I should pray with them. I know that they have been ordained, but still they are only men. So I'll go on with my pagan ways and worship with my friend. I've lived my life upon this lake, and there my days I'll end.
Thank you, Devin. There was no way that I could read that poem. The reason I pick Willis Rothra is that he was the man that taught me the secret of what may be a disappearing art, and that is live baiting for muskellunge on Chautauqua Lake. And I'm going to start with that portion of the activity and show you some of the equipment that is used for live baiting. Some of the equipment may be used for other things also, but the first thing that a live baiter has to have and decide on is the type of pole he wants. I have seen live bait poles that have been 10 and 12 feet long, and at their thinnest end they've been a ½ inch in diameter. Bamboo, it's no give, just a huge long stick. Both of these put in holders on each side of a rowboat and cast out to troll for the muskellunge. Let me show you what I was taught was the standard rigging for a muskellunge live bait fishing experience. And I'll take the pole that I use now for that purpose and show it to you. It happens to be an old level wind reel, the level wind reel that I caught my first muskellunge on, as a matter of fact. My first muskellunge was caught after fishing the lake for 10 summers, 1 week at a time with my father-in-law. And I did get a fish up to the side of the boat once in those 10 summers. But the first year that I lived on Chautauqua Lake and in Chautauqua County, on October 3rd, 1960, you can tell it was an outstanding day, late in the afternoon, I went out on the lake and noticed that there were a whole number of people fishing for muskellunge up in the northern end of the lake. And then I realized that there was a white fly hatch coming up, and chasing the white fly hatch were a bunch of silver-sided fish, different characters and quantities. And as I spent the afternoon out there, I began to realize that I was the only boat that had not had a muskellunge up to the side of the boat. And finally I cast out with this particular pole and reel, and I thought I was in the weeds. And I cranked in with, I happened to have on a jointed minnow pikey with a sharp bill on it. And all of a sudden, I got the weeds up so that I could see that it wasn't a weed. It turned out to be one of God's great creatures, a 48.5-inch, 30-pound muskellunge. I've never caught another one that large. And also understand that my fish has not grown. Nominally, fish after they've been caught and years after they've been caught seem to take on bigger proportion. But this was only 48.5 inches, a level wind reel with a simple minnow pikey on it and about 20-pound test line. But to live baiting. Live baiting rig starts with a special hook and leader and swivel, and there goes part of it on the floor. But the hook allows you to put it through the lower and upper lip of a creek chub or a horn dice or a 7 or 8 inch perch. And then what you need are a series of bobbers. And I'll have to chase one of them. At about 6 feet out from the hook, depending upon how deep you're going to fish on a particular day, you put on the first bobber. It's a small bobber. It's not going to irritate the fish at all when he picks up your bait and decides to swallow it. So now we've got 6 feet of line out. We're going to take another 6 feet of line out. And up there, we're going to put another bobber. In everybody's life, a little rain must fall. In this case, it was the microphone. We'll try and see if we can do a better job now. So at 12 feet out, we put another bobber. The equipment is still available for those of you that are interested. It just so happens that my brother didn't like the white bobbers that I'd been using for years, and therefore he put together some orange bobbers for me. These are nothing more than rings that you can buy in the hardware store. Now I'm ready. I've got one bobber at 12 feet, another bobber at 6 feet. Now this 6-foot bobber might be in 8 feet instead of 6 feet. It depends upon where you're going to do your live baiting. Traditionally, before the loss of the weed bed in the northern part of Chautauqua Lake, I used to fish on just the outside of the weed bed, which would be, depending upon the material on the bottom of the lake, somewhere around 10 feet. And this was an ideal setup. And what you would do, you would put one pole out on each side of the boat, your rowboat. By the way, in most instances, this type of fishing was done in the late evening or at night. And so there was other equipment that you needed. You needed a set of bow lights with a green and red light. You needed a white light behind you. You needed a headlight. You needed a life vest. By the way, if you ever go out on the lake, wear your life vest. I don't care what you're doing. If you're in a boat, wear a life vest. It's very good insurance. Anyway, you get out on the lake and you then start to slowly roll. And one of the most important things about the various poles and reels that were used in live baiting was that it had to have a click that made noise. Without a click that made noise, fishing in the dark at night became a very difficult task. I have borrowed another type of pole and reel, and the outstanding feature of this reel, as far as I am concerned, is it has a beautiful click on it. And you set the tension of the click so that you can row slowly. And when I say slowly, I'm talking about less than a mile an hour. And you row, and you row, and you row, and you row until all of a sudden, even if it's in the dark of night, you begin to hear your reel doing this. You stop rowing. You rest a moment, and then you start rowing backwards and looking for your bobbers on whichever pole the action was taken. And nominally what you find is the 12-foot bobber is still on the surface. And in many instances, it's laying flat. Very rarely, it's standing up in the water. But the little bobber, you're not going to find. Because what has happened is the muskellunge has taken it down, and he's now either holding the bait sideways in his mouth, or he's already got it partially in his gullet, or in his mouth only. And you want to wait until you know that he has taken the hook. Ooh. And he's got the hook in the mouth so that when you go to set it, you're going to hook him. The vast majority of instances when I have live bait fished, the fish has been hooked in the mouth. On one occasion, the fish had already started to take the creek chub or the horn dice or the perch down, and I caught it in its gullet. And in another case, the fish had already put the bait all the way into its stomach, and when we set the hook, we actually set it in its spine, and it caused it to come up in a humped condition. 38-inch fish, however, which gives you quite a nice set of muskellunge fillets for smoking or broiling or whatever you want to do with them. That's the secret of live baiting, the patience, afternoon, evening. I can tell you stories. I ought to tell you a story about a neighbor up the lake. He'd been there for years and years and years, and he really wasn't an old-timer. He was a contemporary. And Chuck went out one afternoon, late in the afternoon in September. Live baiting is basically a fall activity. It's not a summer activity. And he went out, and he put over one live bait rig over one side of the boat, and he put the live bait rig over the other side of the boat. I happened to be standing on shore, maybe at the most 200 feet from him as he was rigging up. And all of a sudden he says, "Damn!" And he began to work one rig. And he had a fish on it. And he pulled it in. It was a 27-inch walleye pike. And of course, he was very happy to get a 27-inch walleye. And he put it in the boat. And he looked around and he said, "Damn!" And the other rig had gone down. And he started to play that in. And all of a sudden, he got a little action. And Chuck Skinner, in 20 minutes of late afternoon fishing, caught a 38-inch muskellunge and a 27-inch walleye pike. He said, "There went the rest of the evening and the night. What am I going to do?" And that was it for Chuck that particular day. One other live bait fishing experience that I enjoyed immensely was with my daughter Sally. She would go out fishing with me sometimes. And sometimes what we would do is we'd take the live bait rigs and we'd let them drag behind us as we did bait casting. And this particular afternoon, again a fall afternoon, very few of us are on the lake, and Sally decided that she wanted to go fishing, and I said, "Boy, that's wonderful," and so we went. And one of the things that I often told my children was, when you're cold, I don't know it unless you tell me. And after about 2.5 hours of drifting around parts of Hartfield Bay, Sally said to me, "Dad, I'm cold. It's time to go home." We had drifted from about the mouth of the big inlet down to the old Woodland dock and piling area on the eastern shore of the lake, along basically the edge of the weeds on the outer edge at that particular time. I said, "Okay, let's put it away." And then I looked out at our two live bait rigs that were behind us, and I said, "Sally, we're not going home. We've got a problem. Your rig has the small bobber is gone. We're going to have to creep back up on it. We rode back up on it. It so happened that she was using this particular pole at the time. And as you can see, it's an old, tired Shakespeare reel. They don't make them like this anymore. They make beautiful, beautiful new monsters that you can do all kinds of things with. Anyway, I said, we're going to row back, and we're going to take off the top bobber, because we could see the top bobber was laying flat on the top of the lake. I said, we're going to take off the top bobber, and then we're going to look for the little bobber. So I took the top bobber off, and I said, now, what I want you to do, I'm going to settle in the bottom of the boat, and we're going to get right up. You can see the little bobber. It's about 1.5 feet under the water. You be prepared when we get over it to strike. Well, I'll tell you what happened when she struck. The pole went like this. And I said, we're in trouble. Oh boy, are we in trouble. And I whooped and I hollered and I shouted, and she kept saying, Daddy, there's people that can hear you. Don't make so much noise. And she coolly fought this fish for about 20 minutes before it decided to come up, and we boated it. It was a 42-inch muskellunge. We're talking about a fish in the 15 to 20 pound category. We saw a fisherman inshore, closer to the shore. We went in and I said, look at what my daughter caught, and she's acting like the coolest cat you've ever seen. We get back to the dock, and she gets up and she sits down on the dock and she starts to shake. And all of the energy and all of the coolness that she had disappeared there for a moment or two. She just had the shakes all over. But that was a wonderful, wonderful time. Other fishing for muskellunge on Chautauqua Lake. I was taught by a group that basically had their headquarters in the Hotel Holland. So you can think of names like Clarence Kircher, Dick Frank, and a number of other people. And they taught me various ways to fish. And one of the things that happens is that you've got to understand what part of the lake I did most of my fishing in. So if the camera crew can pan up to the map of the northern end of Chautauqua Lake, I can show you the terrain and the topography of the bottom of the lake that plays a role in how we did our fishing. Most of the gentlemen that I fished with had depth finders on their boat. Here you can see the northern end of the lake. Basically, we fished from the bell tower at Chautauqua Institution northward. On rare occasion, we would go beyond that point, but most of the time, this was our fishing area. We like to fish in along the edge of the littoral zone, which is that area in which we have rooted aquatics. And then we would fish out at various depths. Notice that the lake bottom in this area is a plane that shapes up from a point between the bell tower and Dwittville Bay. It gradually is a long slope up towards the northern end of the lake. In the vast majority of instances when we trolled with light rigs. By light rigs, I mean we didn't use 40 and 50 pound test line and 3-ounce keel sinkers and that type of thing. In most instances, we fished with lures that had a diving capability, and we fished with lead core lines. Total metal lines were outlined a number of years ago, but lead core lines are still allowable today. And we used different types of baits. I can show you these, and some of you will recognize them as bombers of different categories. Lazy ikes, flatfish of various sizes, all the way. The smallest flatfish that I ever caught a lunge on is this X4. I happened to catch a lunge just outside of Prendergast Point one day on a 6-pound test line, back when you could keep a 33-inch lunge on that small a bait. I also had encountered muskellunge when I've been fishing for perch that I was going to use for bait for live baiting. In one instance, one day I'm out with a 7.5-foot cane pole, which is a very small thing, and I'm after about an 8-inch perch. And I get a sunfish on it, and as I'm pulling it up on the inside of the weed line, this lunge comes and grabs it sideways in its mouth. I was able to reach for the net, but just about the time I dipped the net under the fish, he opened his mouth and went away. I might tell you another thing that's very important about muskellunge fishing. Check your equipment every day. Check your snaps, check your swivels. I have only lost one muskellunge because of improperly used equipment or worn equipment. In this case, it happened to be a snap hook that I hadn't put all the way in and snapped it completely. And I had the lunge right up next to the boat, and it broke off and took the plug and disappeared. Another thing that I would mention to you is a plug called a swick, which is a plug that is 8.5 inches long. It basically is a surface lure, and when the fishermen fish with it and they crank with it, they pull it, and it dives down in the water and then slowly floats up. I have found 6 dead muskellunge over the 30 years that I've fished Chautauqua Lake with swicks caught someplace in their throat, outside of their throat, or in their mouths. I have not found any other lures in dead muskellunge. I found muskellunge, spring freshet is a wonderful time to check the lake. I can remember one year coming upon a pair of muskellunge lying on the side of the lake. The big fish was probably 40 inches. The small fish was probably 25 inches, and what had happened was the muskellunge had swallowed the other muskellunge, and it had started to swim out of its gill, and they both perished. Now, if you want to see that action in life, you can see it by going to the fish hatchery when they have the small fry. And the small fry are eating their fellow fry. So a muskellunge is not afraid of attacking anything when it's hungry. On the board, there is a picture of my 2 brothers holding muskellunge. This happened to be a day in September. We'd been on Dick Johnson's boat in the south part of the lake, and we'd come up under the bridge. Before we reached the bridge, my brother Jim caught his fish, and as we got up about the area of the bell tower, my brother Dick caught his fish. Those 2 fish jointly, well, this isn't my 2 fishing buddies. This is my brother Dick and I with about a 40-inch muskellunge that I caught at some other time. But there is a picture there of both of my brothers holding fish and smiling from ear to ear. It happened to be on Dick Johnson's boat. It happened to be a late September, early October fishing outing. I was the guide. Dick Johnson was the captain of the vessel. My brother Jim, with the hat on, caught his fish below the bridge. My brother Dick caught his fish somewhere near the bell tower. We're talking about a combined weight of 53 pounds. We happened to pass Spike Kelderhouse that particular day, and I held up both fish and I said, "Hey Spike, is this what you're out there for today?" And of course, we were just happier than you could believe. The fish that my brother had, that Jim had, which was the lighter colored of the 2 fish, had a 15-inch catfish in its gut when we cleaned it. It had just started to digest the fish. So you get an idea of when these fish are on the prowl. Hold that picture for a moment also, because I want you to look at the fin on this fish, or the fins on this fish, and you'll see that they're very red and stressed. This was 1983, and it was probably at the top of the dollar spot infection that we had on the muskellunge of Chautauqua Lake. It was a glorious day. We talk about it continuously. But to you, the person that might be interested in fishing on Chautauqua Lake, don't be afraid to use any type of a plug that meets your fancy. I'm going to tell you that I've lost only 1 lunge. I've never had a line break on me because I make sure I have good new line every year or every other year, depending upon what the line is. I've fished for muskellunge with as light as 6-pound test line, and I know that some of the men that fish Chautauqua Lake that are members of muskellunge fishing organizations may even fish with lighter equipment than that. It used to be that on an afternoon I could say to somebody, let's go out and do some lunge fishing, and the least I'll be able to provide you with is a follow-up to the boat of a muskellunge. However, the whole system of the lake has gone through a dynamic change since the early 70s. We've seen a change in the nutrient loading. We've seen a change in the weed community. We've seen the introduction of fish into the lake that weren't there, as far as we know, in earlier years. And the muskellunge population has declined. However, the state of New York, in its wisdom, has suggested that we now only keep a lunge if it's over 40 inches. The reason for this is very simple. The female muskellunge were growing so rapidly in the lake that they are often being caught as legal fish at 32 inches before they had spawned. And so we were taking our brood stock away. And they immediately moved to 40-inch fish. Now, I know the person that decided that we should not keep anything under 40 inches has never tried to disconnect himself from a 38-inch muskellunge and not harm either himself or the fish. I fish basically with this type of a pole as a trolling pole. I've tried longer poles, but the longer the pole gets, the more the pole reacts with the action of the lure, and you don't get the type of action that you want. The lure of my choice in most instances is a flatfish. This means that you have to troll at somewhere between 2.7 miles an hour and 3.1 mile an hour. Otherwise, the flatfish will come out of the water. With lead core line, it's marked every 10 yards, and every 10 yards of line that I let out, this lure goes down 3 feet. How do I know that? Because time after time I have tested it and deliberately dug the plug into the bottom of the lake and noted the elevation that I was at with my depth finder at that particular time. We fish basically flatfish. We basically fish with yellow, chartreuse, red and orange. However, if you put a plug in front of a fish when he's hungry, he doesn't care or she doesn't care. And when I say he, she, realize that I've caught very few male muskellunge that are more than 35 inches long. After you pass 35 inches, 36 inches, and start up into the 40 inches, you're going to catch, the fish is going to be a female muskellunge. Put them back? I don't know. A lot of people are putting fishing and releasing them. Every once in a while I like to harvest a fish. I did last year, or the year before last, I took one that I kept. It happened to turn out to make beautiful smoked fillets, and we served them at a number of gatherings and people enjoyed them immensely. Fact of the matter is, at one of the county officers associations, we took 3 muskellunge from the lake to the eastern part of the state and treated the people to smoked muskellunge, which is a wonderful treat. In closing, I would say to you that have not handled a muskellunge correctly, and by handling it correctly I mean you catch it, you take it home, you dress it, you clean it, you cool it. You've spoiled a very, very good dinner. You can broil it, you can fry it, you can bake it, and as long as you don't eat the fat that is associated with the flesh of the fish, it is as good as halibut, it's as good as salmon. It can't quite beat a fillet of perch, but it's good eating if you handle it right. And I strongly, strongly invite you to try and catch one of those 40 inchers. And if you're not going to eat it, if you're just going to brag on it, take a picture of it and release it back to the lake so that some other people can enjoy the privilege of catching one of those beautiful fish. That's it for today. Catch a fish.